Good morning and welcome to Kunsong Payo Juling. Click the wrong button. It's wonderful to see you this morning and to have you join in a teaching by Jetsunma Ahkon Lhamo. This teaching was given back in 1991. The title of the teaching is Karma Just Keeps Increasing. So we will begin. Thank you.
This teaching is a continuation of what the children have taught us. And it's a way of understanding more deeply in the way that the Buddha teaches us to understand. By understanding the content, the apparent reality of cyclic existence. First of all, by definition, cyclic existence is that which is the cycle of death and rebirth. Cyclic existence continues, and it has continued since the first idea of self-nature as being inherently real. And each one of us have experienced the cause and effect, continual arising of the birth and death experience, and the continual arising of connecting cause and effect scenarios. According to the Buddha, nothing in cyclic existence, nothing in apparent reality arises rootless. That is to say, there is never any kind of causeless or baseless experience that any of us have ever or will ever experience on an individual or collective level. According to the Buddha, what we think, this process that we become deluded with, cannot be. And what we actually think is that events occur toward us or to us, that things seem to arise spontaneously in our lives that we cannot account for. We seem to feel victimized by our environment. We seem to feel not understanding. We are continually naive about what appears before us, continually naive about the neuroses even that arises within our own mind with which we must assume that we have some intimate connection with, somewhere. Still, we are always surprised at the neuroses that arises within our minds, always surprised that once again we are beaten by our own thoughts and feelings, always surprised when the world contrives to slice us off at the knees. But according to the Buddha, that can never happen. It simply is not possible for events to arise rootless or foundationless. All events, according to the Buddha, arise from a cause. And this cause is a direct cause. There are no accidental slipshod methods by which things come together and contrive to create a circumstance that victimizes us. All that we experience is a pattern, a habitual pattern that seems to appear as a continuum. Our experience is a continuum, and the basis of that continuum is the idea of self-nature as being inherently real. Again, this is a very limited description, but the Buddha teaches us that once the idea, the beginning idea of self-nature as being inherently real, the idea of ego, of selfness, becomes solid. At that point, quite naturally and quite instantly, I should say simultaneously, one has to divide self from the environment. One has to create the difference between self and other. That is the only way that the idea or structure of self can exist. Otherwise, it cannot exist. It must exist simultaneously with the idea of other, you see. And once the idea of self exists, we must continue to define it. Furthermore, once that definition process occurs and once the idea of self exists, the idea of self must continue. Self by nature must have a continuum, or it cannot be self. So all it takes is that one idea of self-nature as being solid and inherently real for an entire tapestry to be created, for an entire tapestry of cause and effect relationship, for an entire continuum of experience, and an actual worlds, if you will, of continuum to be birthed instantly by that. All probabilities to be birthed instantly like that, simply by developing the idea of self-nature as being inherently real. From that one singular idea, from holding to that idea, even for a moment, worlds are born. And we are now involved, of course, in that idea, because since beginningless time, and by beginningless time I mean time so long, so great, that we cannot remember. We cannot have any connection to that time. Since that beginningless time, continuum has continued. We have to remember that the basis of continuum is the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, and that continuum is actually a puffball. And that continuum stops continuing when we don't continue it anymore. But again, while that idea is there, continuum naturally continues. We are naturally involved in this process. Our tendency is to try to battle, if you will, or create some understanding or some leverage with which to manipulate within that continuum. And that's really how we deal with our world. We see ourselves as being lonely. We try to battle that loneliness by setting up loneliness as being real, and me being real, and you being real, and then we try to solve it by bringing me and you together so that we can solve loneliness. But of course, what we've actually done is to firm up the idea of loneliness, solidify the idea of self-nature as being inherently real, and then fortify you as well. We try to create that kind of leverage within this continuum. We try to manipulate within this continuum, and we end up fortifying and continuing the continuum. Now, according to the Buddha, a better way to solve the idea of loneliness would actually be a twofold method if you boil it down to its essential nature. First of all, we should begin to understand in a very sophisticated way what brings about loneliness. If we understand, as I have just mentioned, we should understand that all events in our continuum, all events in cyclic existence arise from a cause, and that cause is direct. We should assume then that loneliness arises from a cause as well, and that the root of that cause can be found in some previous action of our own, since the loneliness is happening to us and not someone else. It's pretty direct. It's just that real. So, trying to examine what the cause of that might be, we can assume that in the past we have conferred loneliness on someone else, that we assume that it's that direct. It's just so simple, it's easy to miss. But we can assume that in the past we have conferred loneliness on someone else. Do you think that that's impossible? I doubt it. Think about our lives today. Have we always been right there for our kids? Have we always been right there for our spouses? Have we always been right there and supportive in all of our love relationships? Have we always been there for those that are needy in the world? Have we spent ourselves in that way? Do you feel spent in that way? I don't think so. That's probably not the case. Basically, we spend most of our time thinking about what we need and ourselves and how to satisfy our needs and pretty much meditating on our loneliness and our neuroses. But we've spent very little time of the time that we are allotted actually being of benefit to others. I mean, if you look at a 24-hour day, you know, we hold this idea that we're basically kind people, but when it comes down to slotting out what we've done with our day, we've probably spent no more than 2.5 solid minutes in real kindness. Even though we've thought about how kind we are, probably 23 hours and 2.5 minutes. So we have to assume then that this loneliness arises from a cause. And the Buddha teaches us then the way to deal with this loneliness is not to concentrate more on our loneliness and more on what we need and less on what others need by trying to get someone to make us stop being lonely through manipulating a relationship. But rather, we should dive in and apply the antidote. The antidote then is to be supportive of others, kind towards others, loving toward others for more than 2.5 minutes a day. And to do so to benefit them, but not thinking, well, if I'm really kind for an hour, then maybe, you know, tomorrow I'll get some love in my life. You know, I'll get a good hour of love in my life. And that will keep me afloat for the rest of the day. We shouldn't think like that. That you actually want to incorporate loving kindness into your life because it is the antidote to suffering, and because you understand that others actually need your loving kindness and your support. And you go at it with that kind of heartfelt reason. This becomes your reasoning. You actually transform the mind into something that is really concerned with the well-being of others. And that actually is the antidote within the mind stream that will bring about the cause, that will act as the cause to bring about the result of the termination of the appearance of loneliness in our lives, because loneliness also arises within our mind streams. So we look to actually transforming our mind streams and actually purifying our mind streams in order to bring about this desired result. We think then of actually examining our lives, seeing what's really there, getting that all things arise from the cause, and that the cause originates within our own mind stream, therefore taking responsibility for it and applying the direct antidote. It's so simple it could work. According to Buddha, it's the only thing that does work. And the way that we can assume that this is true is by examining all of the other methods that we have tried and seeing how futile they have been, how little they have worked. How hard have you tried in relationships to end your loneliness? How hard have you tried to reach out for a relationship that will end your loneliness? How much have you tried to manipulate your partner into ending your loneliness? How much have you given responsibility for your loneliness to others? How much have you been victimized by your loneliness? How much have you put on an act about your loneliness so that others can see it? How much have you demonstrated your loneliness openly in such a way as to get sympathy? How much have you played games like that in an effort to combat the evidence of past causes that you yourself have participated in? By avoiding the cause and only combating the result. And how much result has it brought? I mean, how much benefit has there been? Oh, it's true. It's just because of the nature of cyclic existence, just because of the nature of physical reality, that we can dupe ourselves into thinking we've solved problems temporarily. But if we really examine them intelligently, we never have. There is no reason to think that we will ever solve the problem of loneliness by manipulating others, is there? because it has never really worked. Not for any length of time. Not ever. Not once. And there is no reason to think that any of the things in life that we feel victimized by can be solved by the methods that we have already applied. Because if we had solved them by the methods that we had already applied, we would probably be founding our own world religion, even as we speak, with all of the answers completely intact, and us completely successful in every single regard, but that it does not seem to be the case. Instead, we are searching for truth, trying to understand how to make peace in the world, how to make peace in our minds, how to get a hold of ourselves, how to live a life that will bring about the termination of all the discomfort that we have felt, how to learn and how to become something that has the answers. Now, the Buddha teaches us that all things arise from a cause, and that actually, from one point of view, allowing for a deeper understanding of time and space reality as being not what we think it is. In that we, in our assumption of ego, have to see continuum happen in a continuous way. That is to say, we have to perceive in a linear way. We perceive cause bringing about effect, bringing about cause, bringing about effect, and we actually see this happening in a linear fashion, that cause precedes effect, and effect goes after cause. And we see it happening in a way that complements or is agreeable with the form that we now take. We now take this human form, and in this human form we live on the earth in a physical way, in a physical dimension. Physical dimension has certain characteristics. There are certain, the cause and effect relationships tend to drag a little bit. In the physical realm, it takes time. Time is a thing that happens that separates cause from effect to some degree. In other words, let's say if we were to take a poison, even right now, depending on the nature of the poison, it would act fairly quickly, but there would be a time lapse, or it would take a very long time to act. Let's say if we were to stop eating. Well, if we stop eating and stop drinking, after a period of time we would die from not eating and not drinking. Isn't that right? But actually, the moment that we stop eating and drinking, we are as stopped as we are going to be of eating and drinking. But it takes time for the thing to play itself out, simply by the nature of our physical reality. And it's that way also in terms of the conceptions that we give birth, the items that we give birth to and conceptualize in our minds. In that if we think thoughts of hatred, it may take some time before these thoughts actually play themselves out. And in fact, we may have forgotten these thoughts of hatred, so that when something ripens in our life that acts against us and we feel victimized by that, we may not understand that it has actually come from hatred that arises in our own mind streams. You see what I'm saying? It takes time for these things to play themselves out. And so because of that, that's actually a tremendous pitfall, in that we seem to have very little learning capacity. We just don't get the big picture. We don't get the direct correlation between hatred, greed, and ignorance and the sufferings that we endure in our life. We don't get the big picture at all. We don't get that sometimes we can hurt other sentient beings, and that later on in our lives, perhaps a week later, perhaps 2 weeks later, perhaps 10 years later, perhaps 10 lifetimes later, that will return to us because it exists within our mind stream, and all of the continuum of that experience is present there. Not because someone chalks it up in a book somewhere up in some place, heaven or somewhere, and then they send it back at us when we're needing it most. It isn't like that at all. In fact, what has happened is that when you birth this cause and effect relationship within the mind stream, the entire cause and effect relationship is there. It is birthed. The appearance of time is a delusion that causes us to remain confused. But in fact, the entire event is already present within our mind streams. So that from the perspective of interdependent arising, of cause and effect arising interdependently, we give birth to both the cause and the effect at the same time. Now that will turn you around the next time you decide to be hateful. Because you can look in the face of someone to whom you are being hateful, and you can see it's there coming back at you now. It is already existing. The suffering that you will exist in kind already exists, has been constructed. It is there. Cause and effect arise interdependently, and they arise simultaneously. They exist within our mind stream. There's this funny little drunkenness we have, this funny little delusion that we have, that we think we can beat the clock somehow, you know? That we can be hateful right now, or maybe we can steal from somebody right now. We can steal something from somebody, and somehow before that comes around and somebody steals from us or becomes hateful toward us, everything's going to change. You know? Everything's going to change in such a way that it simply isn't there anymore. Somehow the cosmos, or whoever's in charge, forgetting that there's nobody in charge but us, but anyway, whoever's in charge is going to somehow forget, you know, as though there were a god that were a doddering old fool, far less intelligent than you, and you are going to beat the socks off of him. That's what we think. We really think that way. We're just going to get away with it, and we skip merrily away from the damage that we've done, thinking that we are so slick. But in fact, that is not the case, I'm afraid to tell you. There really is not some doddering old fool there, just remembering to put down the checks and X's, or sometimes forgetting. And this thing isn't done with mirrors, you know. You really can't beat the clock, and you can't fool anybody. Because basically, when you give birth to hatred, greed, and ignorance in your mind stream, the cause and effect relationships already exist. They are printed. They are cut, printed. It's happening. It's already happening. The delusion is in your experience of time. But within the view of relativity, these things are already occurring. Now, I've described one method for dealing with this, and that is to apply the direct antidote through a sophisticated understanding of how cause and effect arise interdependently, and from taking a real responsibility for what you have just given birth to and realizing that you are not, it's like having a child, you know. I mean, you think about it, you give birth to this little baby, and we do this, we think it's always going to be like this. Having a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old, I can tell you that that's not true. Those little critters grow up to be those big, monstrous critters. And they're a very different game at that point. But when we give birth to these little things, we think that's all they're ever going to be. So cute, and they're always going to smell like that. I have a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old boy, and they don't smell like that anymore. Those little feet, they'll always be like that. Big feet. We do that within our minds. We give birth to something and we think that it's just like that, and that's it. We don't realize that the adult of that situation is already there. Already there, guaranteed. So we have to look at applying the direct antidote and having a sophisticated understanding of the interdependence of cause and effect. But now we have to go further, because the Buddha gave a different teaching, not a different teaching actually, but a deeper teaching. To apply the direct antidote is to deal with cause and effect relationships in a relative way. But the Buddha also gave another teaching, in that he did teach that there is a cessation of suffering. That is to say, interdependently arising cause and effect. There is a cessation of suffering, and that cessation of suffering is called enlightenment. Now, within the context of enlightenment, what are we to understand changes? One understands the primordial nature, the intrinsic nature of the cause. One understands the inseparability of the effect. And one understands the nature of the effect as well. Furthermore, one understands the primordial nature of the causer, the one who has brought about the causes, and one understands the primordial wisdom nature of the one that is affected. One understands the inseparability of cause and effect. One understands the intrinsic nature of cause and effect. And in that way, in viewing that nature, in understanding that nature to the degree that one can, in a stable way, abide spontaneously within that view of emptiness, of the primordial wisdom nature, one can taste that nature to such a firm degree that in awakening to it, in tasting it, in realizing it, all constraints or distinctions that occur within that nature are understood to be puffballs. They are understood to be empty as well and inseparable from that nature. In viewing that nature, in abiding spontaneously in that nature, in realizing or awakening to that nature, cause and effect relationships are also understood in their nature. And in that regard, their emptiness is viewed firmly. In that state of awakening, in that state of enlightenment, cause and effect relationships naturally subside. They are pacified. How are they pacified? They are pacified in that one realizes the nature is the nature is the nature. One awakens to that nature to the degree that the mind ceases to make distinction, the kind of distinction, for instance, that is the basis of the assumption of self-nature as inherently real and other as being separate. One no longer makes such distinction, and that distinction is actually the building blocks by which all suffering is created, by which all cause and effect relationships are created. But the interesting thing about understanding that these two methods can be applied, that is the direct antidote method concerning relative view, and also the realization of the primordial wisdom state, or the awakening to the enlightened nature, and therefore the indivisibility between subject and object. That these are the two methods. Well, of course, rather than having to apply the antidote to all these things that we have going on for us, which seems like an odiously painful thing to do for a very long period of time. I mean, to be kind for as long as we've been nasty, think about it, you know. That seems like a whole lot of trouble, doesn't it? I mean, it was so much trouble to be nasty. Now we have to go be kind. Get real. So we think that we can hardly do this. So what we need to do now is we need to sit down and get enlightened. So let's do it right now, shall we? Wait a minute. I want to look real when I do this. Do you think that that can happen? Are we going to just sit down and get in? Have you ever tried that? Sure you have. You know you have. Sure you have. Anybody in this room has sat down and said, okay, this is it. I'm going to do like the big B, and I'm not getting up until this is over. Well, the difference between you and the big B is that the big B spent a lot of time in previous incarnations applying the direct antidote. So he was finished with all the nasty stuff. And he paid back a lot of dues, and he actually purified a lot of the cause and effect relationships within his own mind stream, so that his mind stream was not like ours is now. His mind stream was much more pure. He had at least a running shot at viewing the primordial wisdom nature, where we have a running shot at remaining firmly entrenched in our neuroses for a very long time under that tree. And that's what he did. He was able to really, the mind was so spacious, his mind was so relaxed due to the purity of it, due to the endless practice of loving kindness and the endless meditation that he had done, and the endless pacifying of all of these cause and effect relationships that he himself took responsibility for and applied the technology to resolve, that his mind was quite spacious and quite clear. So that's why he doesn't say, sit down under a tree and get the big picture. What he says is actually to realize in a sophisticated way the cause and effect relationships and how they arise within relative view, and to apply the direct antidote. And then he also teaches us to awaken to the primordial wisdom state. Fortunately, in Vajrayana, we have the added dimension of being able to practice the pacification of cause and effect relationships in a very condensed way. And the methods that we have to do that are actually quite technical. They really are. There's a great deal of visualization, there's a great deal of mantra recitation, there's a great deal of different kinds of ritual practices that one would do. And each of those practices are not, it's not like you just do ritual things. In those practices you have an understanding of the outer, inner, and secret meaning of those practices and how they actually relate to the mind as it appears in the world now, and how it actually pacifies causes. For instance, since time out of mind, we have been concentrating on our own ego. You know, we have been concentrating on self-nature as being inherently real and what we want and what we can do to make self-nature even happier at being inherently real. In Vajrayana, instead, one generates oneself as the primordial wisdom deity through the use of visualization and mantra recitation and through preparation practices, and then arising as the deity, one arises from the space of emptiness, from samadhi, rather than from the idea of self-nature being solid, and from also the very essence of bodhicitta, or compassion. So one generates oneself as this pure deity form, arising in compassion from emptiness, and realizes one's nature as being inseparable from emptiness. And that is an antidote that in a very short and condensed time can purify, since we're doing it very strongly and with a great deal of force, really, and energy, can purify the assumption of self-nature, which is done in confusion and in a very loose way, that we have been involved in since the beginning of time, or beginningless time. So we have methods now that we can actually use, but basically they are about pacifying cause and effect relationships and assuming responsibility for them having arisen in your mind stream, and assuming that that is where the end will come, and also through performing meditation and practice in order to awaken to the primordial wisdom nature, which is your true nature, undefiled, unchangeable, ever-present, and undiminished. That these basically are the methods. Now we're going to walk right out of here and we're going to continue doing what we're used to doing, which is to say, I'm lonely, which is to say, take me out to breakfast because I'm lonely. Or, you know, all of the little things that we do, or buy me a car, let me get, you know, whatever it is that we're doing, that we all have, you know what it is. I don't have to tell you what it is that we do. You already know this. So whatever it is, you have to at least first take the first step of looking at it and seeing what you're doing. That you're stepping into this diluted continuum and you're trying to manipulate the continuum, and what you're actually doing is reinforcing the continuum so that it will most certainly, assuredly continue. And if you're willing to do that and pay the price of breakfast besides, have a good time. I hope you have a great time. But at the same time, please begin at least to turn the mind to taking responsibility for the content of your mind stream and to realizing where the cessation of suffering might possibly come from and where it has not come from all this time. And then think about the world in general and how you saw pictures today given to us by the children of these people that are happy about war. They're going to go get them. They're going to jump right into that continuum and drop some bombs. That's like heavy-duty manipulation of your continuum, don't you think? And can it possibly, from the point of view that I've just spoken of, bring any good result? How is that possible? Apple seeds make apple trees. Seeds of hatred create war. War creates seeds of hatred. It continues to arise simultaneously. But you have in your hand a key. It's always been there. But it's like we say, oh, it's there, so I'll just go out and have breakfast some more. We won't look at it. We won't take responsibility. We won't shine it up. We have this precious thing, this precious option, right here, right now, by which to end suffering. And you have the power to use it. No one is so defunct that they cannot begin now. That is not possible. You begin where you begin, and maybe not where someone else is beginning, but you begin.
So thank you very much for joining with us today, and we're always happy to have you be here for Teachings by Jetsunma, as well as we're always happy to have you be here at KPC. It's always better with everyone here, so we hope that you can come at some point, and we hope if you're in the area that you will. But if you're not, or if you just need to stay home for some reason, we have a lot of things online that we'd like to share with you. These teachings by Jetsunma, we do show twice a week, 7:30 on Wednesdays and 11 a.m. on Sundays. Since they're pre-recorded, they are also on YouTube. Many of these she taught way back in the 80s and 90s, so feels like way back, at least at this moment. In addition, we have a live meditation with one of our Anis also on YouTube, as these are Saturdays and Sundays at 10 a.m. In addition, we have a medicine Buddha practice in the evenings every day at 7 p.m. and that's on Facebook Live. And it's a very short practice, a lot of English in it. Can be done by just about anyone. Jetsunma distilled that practice for this time of COVID when so many people would be needing the help and assistance of Medicine Buddha. And so this is practice for you. You can download copies of it and so forth. So enjoy that every evening at 7. Daily, we offer a soak offering. It's a feast offering that is essentially dedicated to creating tremendous amounts of merit and then offering that to the benefit of all sentient beings. So we have those here at the temple Monday through Friday at 5:30 p.m. It's usually a Namchu soak. Saturdays at noon, also a Namchu soak, and these are available on Zoom. And then Sundays at 2 p.m. It's not so much on Zoom. It's Rigzen Dupa, which is at the Guru Rinpoche statue. We're just starting this. Actually, at the statue, we're going to be starting it next week because it's actually predicted to snow in a few minutes, which is really weird. And so, since it's a 2-hour practice and involves a lot of food and offerings and things like that, much easier to do when it's not snowing. So today it will be in the Dharma room at Jetsunma's request. She's asked us to start this starting now and into the foreseeable future to counter a lot of the things that are happening here and around the world, and who knows, maybe even farther around than that. So we will, and we are. So today it will be at 2 p.m. and it will be on Zoom, but it will, I think it will also be on Facebook Live. And the practice will be available if you look on Zoom. Anyway, if you look at the calendar on Tara.org, you'll find all of this information. You'll find out where to go, and you'll find out what you can download the practice, and it's all there for you. The next one of the big practices, Yumka for Dakini Day, will be next Friday at 7:30 p.m. So that's those come about. Each of those, the Yumka for the Dakini, the Rigs and Dupa for Guru Rinpoche, come about once a month for the particular days, like the Guru Rinpoche Day and the Dakini Day. And now, as we move forward, the Rigs and Dupa will be done more often than that. So, big fun over here at KPC, and we hope you come and join us. The prayer room is now open on Saturdays and Sundays from 11 to 4, and we invite you to come and, do some meditation or just enjoy the qualities of the prayer room and the sacred space and so forth. Let me see. As outside, the temple grounds are open every day from dawn to dusk. So if you're in the area, you can always get here. You can always find some sacred place to, have your time with your inner time. And so we offer that for everyone. It's our joy to offer that. We also have animals in the back, and they all require petting and love and give it back in spades. So there's, pigs and chickens and turkeys and geese and, you never know what you're going to find. Soon to be coming goats. So come and enjoy. And just know that we are so happy to have you, and so happy that you can be here. So that's what we've got right this moment. And if you want to make an offering to Jetsunma, because having received a teaching, it's a tradition and it brings about some merit, you can do that on her PayPal account. It's jetsunmagift@gmail.com, and that's in the chat. jetsunmagift@gmail.com. So I think I've made it through the things I meant to say, and I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week, and we'll hopefully see you on Wednesday. Take care.